In the last few months, you might have seen us talking online about the fact that we are writing a book on the methods that we have found over time seem to be really helpful in enabling change to happen in the context of really messy challenges. Over the course of the next few months, I'm going to be speaking with some of our clients, people that we work with, who we consider to be doing really pioneering work in this space. And today, I'm going to be talking with Rob Comber from Ealing Council. Rob, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Joe. Thank you for having me.
So we've known each other for a little while, but I guess only started working with one another in the last couple of years. So I don't actually know what your career path has been to get where you're at now. So could you just explain what is it that you're doing now and how have you got here?
Yeah, of course. So I'm currently working in Ealing Council, which is in West London, as head of change and transformation. But essentially in that role, I work with kind of leadership across the council to look at our change and transformation strategies and how we can make sure that the work we do around change is aligned to the council's vision for the future. So that's where I'm at now. I've been in local government for about 15 years now.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, maybe 15 years. Predominantly at Kent County Council before Ealing, but I was also at the Department for Children, Schools and Families for a little while. I got into local government after being at the Department for Children, Schools and Families for about 2 years. I was working there, mainly because I had a lot of experience with council services when I was a kid, like a lot of
Right.
social services and care intervention services, and I guess I kind of saw both the brilliance of those services and when they can generally make a difference in people, but I also saw the worst of them. And I think one of the things that not just me but my siblings as well, who are now social workers,
All right.
I wanted to do when we were younger is maybe kind of give a little bit back and try and make a difference for people. I don't think we ever necessarily say that's what we intended to do, but we've all ended up wanting to do that. So after university, I ended up at, like I said, the Department for Schools and Families, Children's Schools and Families for a couple of years, before then moving into Kent County Council, where I did a number of different roles. I did a few roles in data analysis. I did a role where I was looking at kind of quality of social work practice and how we can make sure that we've got good quality learning loops within practice to make sure we're continually improving. I then moved into kind of roles that looked at service design and service development, before then moving into the head of change and transformation role at Kent County Council in the Children's Services Department, where we started to bring in kind of more agile methodologies. We started to bring in kind of human-centered design thinking, and we had a kind of a real focus on making sure that services, because at the time things were difficult financially, but making sure that our services that are really critical to people's lives were able to be sustainable in the future. And yeah, then moved to Ealing, where we're now kind of doing some kind of really exciting work with a really pro-change kind of administration and leadership team that generally want to reinvent what local government means to people and start to open up new relationships with residents in Ealing by completely changing the culture and the way that we work. So it's all been very exciting and rewarding and difficult at times, but yeah, it's all really good.
I mean, lots of people get in contact with us, or at least come into contact with us, because they're already experimenting with different ways of working that are they're colouring outside the lines a little bit and not working in the way that local government has traditionally, certainly on projects. And I think that's probably the case with you. You were already thinking about and experimenting with agile ways of working, human-centered design, and that's where we started a relationship. What was it that sort of sparked your interest in those approaches?
So there's a few things. So one is kind of when I was doing the quality assurance work with children's social work, one of the things that I noticed is that experimentation was a really key part of the change they were trying to create in people's lives.
Right.
Social work practice is it's fairly heavily regulated, with some really clear kind of practice frameworks. But within those frameworks, there's kind of really clear space where social workers can experiment with families and try different techniques and different methods and different practices that enable families to kind of grow stronger together. I didn't see that across all of local government. I think there was definitely kind of quite strict models where you can't move out of those boundaries. But I think the thing that got me into it was a period of time in my career where all we heard about was cutting services. So kind of shortly after 2009, a lot of the work we were looking at is like how can we reduce services? There was very little talk about how do we genuinely make things better for people, because without being sustainable, local government can't survive. So there's a big focus on that. I think it just made it deeply sad to see like services cut that I know when I was a kid like meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
So I started to look at kind of, are there different ways that we can do this? And like many people that work in local government, as soon as you lift the lid on the bonnet and start playing around, you can see there's loads of things that are broken that need fixing.
Yeah.
But there's also loads of really great people that work in local government that have just liberated from like the norms and the myths and the rituals that exist, can do really great things. So at that point, I started looking into kind of Lean Six Sigma and looking at kind of how I could use that in a lot of my work. And just naturally, I like understanding how things work and understanding if I play around with them, what difference can I make. So Lean Six Sigma helped me do a little bit of that. But I think one of the things that I realised is it was quite data heavy, quite spreadsheet heavy, quite process heavy.
Yeah.
What I missed from that was the kind of the human elements. So I started then to explore like what are the practices where I can combine what I'm doing with kind of the Lean Six Sigma work. Where are the practices that I've added value to it or are quite different to it that allow me to understand a lot more about the people, and within that experiment in live scenarios. And that's when, and that's at the same time when you might remember kind of FutureGov were on the market.
Yeah.
They, as a consultancy, I think they did a lot to influence some people within local government.
Yeah, I agree.
And start to shift a lot of the thinking. And it was probably them and some of their events that I went to which made me realise actually there's a community of people that are probably thinking quite similarly to me. And there are practices that are outside of local government that actually are quite typically akin to like digital and tech startups, but actually work really well with a people-to-people organisation like local government is. So that's kind of how I got into it at that point.
Yeah, I think Dom and Carrie, who set up FutureGov, I think they both were on the same grad scheme as me. So I went to a whole bunch of conferences where they were talking, and they were a few years ahead of me, maybe 3 or 4 years ahead of me, and maybe even a little bit more than that. And I remember thinking, oh, hang on a minute, there's something else going on here. And I think they probably, although I've never really realised it, probably had an effect on me too. But there's a bunch of ways I could take this conversation, so I'm going to try and keep all these different ways in my head, because I want to get into what do some of these ways of working enable, like what becomes possible when you work in these ways. I'll come back to that. What I want to start with was essentially you're talking about there. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find out about these methodologies and I'm going to start like experimenting with them. I'm going to have a go at some of these things within the scope of my role. And I think sometimes people feel like they don't have permission to do that. And that's never been my experience. In local government, I felt in most roles like I've had an enormous amount of autonomy to try and work in ways that I think are genuinely going to be helpful to residents. And I'm just wondering, was it just you and the way you were wired, or was it the conditions in the council at that point that enabled you to start exploring some of this stuff? What was it? It's not just exploring, right? It's like actually doing.
Actually doing it as well, yeah. Exploring is one thing, but if you're not doing anything with it, it's different. So, like, if you start personally, I think like me and others that are kind of looking at the same kind of work, I think there's like an alignment with like how deeply we care about the work that we do and the people we're working on behalf of. And so with that care, like to act is to care, right? So if you deeply care about it, you want to act, and if you see things aren't working, you want to try and fix them and try and do something differently. So local government is full of these things, whether it's kind of on the micro or the macro level. There's lots of things that can be fixed. I've never once had a experience where I haven't felt that I couldn't do that and start to explore new things and start to implement them. But I think the conditions that for me that not just helped kind of implement what I was doing, but kind of just gave me the freedom and the autonomy to go out and do that was, I think, just starting by building some really kind of credible stock with people that you're working with.
Right.
So I think there's a degree of kind of relationship and trust that happens within local government.
Yeah.
If you have that relationship with people that trust you, you're trusted to go and do the work you need to do in a very autonomous way. So those conditions kind of really helped. But also, I think at the time I started exploring this work, there was just a recognition that we can't keep doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
Like if we keep doing the same things over and over again, like we're going to be no better. So I think not just where I was working, but the whole sector was not just seeking new answers to the same questions. I think they were seeking to open up new questions, like ones that we didn't know about before. So I think those conditions were there to kind of say, well, perhaps what we need to do is move away from a policy-driven decision-making model, where actually we start to do better engagement with residents. We stop consulting after we've made decisions, and actually we kind of move from the inside out to the outside in and start just engaging with people in better ways. So I think those conditions were there. And I think because of the nature of like the service I was working in children's services, it was a people-to-people service anyway. So we had lots of engagement able to happen. I think for me, the thing that kind of enabled me maybe to do more was the first time I tried implementing something that was agile and human-centered in its approach. And that was in Kent. We redesigned the child protection model, but we did it by involving young people and families who had been through the child protection process as part of a project team. So we,
as part of the actual team.
As part of the actual team,
wow.
Yeah. We just said let's be brave. We've not done it before. Let's bring them in. They can be part of the team. They'll open up new conversations for us. They'll kind of link us into different networks, so we can generally start listening to people in a way that has got some impact and purpose to it. So that was probably the time where we saw it happen most effectively there, because we were able to completely redesign the way that we did child protection, and because of that, like, it reduced child protection figures by half in Kent within 12 months. So being able to demonstrate an impact fairly quickly with something very, very new, where essentially I was asking people to take a bit of a leap of faith, both in me and the methods we were using. And that payoff happened. Like once that first thing happened that people saw value in, it opened the door to kind of us starting to not just to use it in part of our project work, but actually embedding some of the principles of design thinking and agile in all of our practice, so that there is a bit of a sustainability. It's not just one person or one team somewhere that does this work. It's something that's done by everybody.
Yeah, but I think to begin with, it does take somebody to take a bit of a leap of faith, and to ask others to trust them as well, and to face the fear of maybe it not working perfectly, or all those things. You know, it takes somebody to be brave enough to do that. You know, I think a bit of courage goes a long way. You know, it's not book smarts that help you to do work in these ways. You know, you actually got to have some courage and test them out. But you started to talk about that piece of work, and it sounds like an amazing example. In the context of that piece of work, what actually happened? What did these ways of working enable? Why were they part of making that really significant change happen?
Yeah, so we were quite deliberate in us not talking about we're using kind of an agile methodology for this. We were just wanting to use the method, but keep it fairly low-fi at that point. So we just said that we're gonna open up more conversations about people's lived experience of what it feels like for them going through the process. So we did a little bit of reverse mentoring. We did some role playing as our discovery piece, so that people could understand the human elements of that process. So not what forms we need to fill out when, and what documents need to be submitted, but actually like what does it feel like for people? So essentially we started off by role playing journey maps for people, and allowing kind of the social workers that with people kind of have those sparks of kind of insight to say, oh, actually when I do this, it affects you in these ways. I understand that. So we did some we did that kind of role playing. People kind of collectively saw the issues then, and then we brought people together and say, right, let's design together. Let's start design together. We'll do 2 weeks time. We're going to do some mock child protection conferences. Let's do that. Once we tried those out and built kind of a model for a child protection conference, we then started to look at, well, what are the systems that go around it? Kind of what forms need to be filled out? What messages get sent? Let's see if we can change that. And by people designing it kind of in fairly short increments, I think what people saw and the reason it became valuable is that they were starting to see value early.
Yeah.
So unlike like projects that I would have done before that perhaps you don't generate the value until the end of a project's been delivered, we were seeing kind of incremental value happen like kind of in front of us.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, that's the real thing that changed it from the leaders that I'm working with. You know, it's really difficult to pitch agile and like design thinking projects to an organization like a local government because we're so boundaried in terms of how we set budgets, how we have standards and consistencies to the way that we deliver work. And essentially asking some people who have kind of got a long kind of tradition in quite structured approaches to say, let's bet on ourselves. Let's say that we believe that this is the right thing to do. And if we do it, we're going to generate value and benefit to the organisation. These are the benefits we think we'll have, but actually we don't quite know yet. But when do you ever know? Like, even if you're doing a normal kind of 5-point business case, like you still don't know the benefits you're going to have. So that narrative, trying to sell that to them and getting people involved really helped. We also made the process super visible. So we had our Director of Children's Services getting involved and coming in so they could feel it and experience it for themselves. So it wasn't just a small group of people doing a piece of work that actually, because it was so controlled, wouldn't work elsewhere. We opened it up to as many people as possible to come and get involved and try it out or observe. And that kind of really seemed to work. So yeah, I'm super proud of that piece of work as well. It's not just because it was the first time doing a kind of a significant project using these methods, but actually it made a genuine impact for people. Like we saw relationships change. We saw people who are in very complex family environments kind of feel a bit stronger and feel that they had a bit more voice. There was a bit more kind of power sharing within the process, and just kind of like liberating them from those constraints that they had before. Actually just really powerful in itself, just giving people the power and choice and control in how services are run and delivered. It just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in that. I think coming back to something you said earlier on about people having some sort of stock in you and, you know, building relationships with people to enable them to, have a bit of faith in you. I think that's so important. But I also think that building genuine relationships with the recipients of services, you know, is important, because we can't, particularly a service like the one you're describing, child protection, there's no perfect process, is there? Like there are some challenges in a family. There aren't a series of processes that you just put people through and all of a sudden their problems are fixed. The only way you really get to the heart of what's going on and how can I be helpful is by building a relationship with them and figuring out, you know, what's going to be the most useful next few moves. How do you think about that in the context of the projects that you work on? How do you go about building those relationships with people that are actually going to benefit from the service?
So it's tricky. I think there is some distrust around kind of local government, and particularly when you look at social services, there's a degree of kind of fear and distrust of the service. So it's always tricky. I think for me, the starting part of that is about kind of being incredibly generous with your time, and just leaning into some humility as well. So just being able to spend time with people, to listen and to understand, and to genuinely empathize with people is probably the starting point for it. That for me, just creating the time, which in local government feels really difficult. We're all very time pressured. To say that part of my workday is to sit and build a relationship with a resident by having a cup of tea or a coffee with them and listening to them, that feels like a real luxury that perhaps we don't always have. But that luxury needs to be kind of reframed into, it's a really important part of our work that we have those relationships. So for me, just being able to spend that time with people to generally understand and listen is helpful. One of the things that I've kind of noticed as well is that kind of in my career, I've always done a lot of research, some quantitative, but a lot qualitative. And just the process of conducting meaningful, well thought out research is an exercise in trust building in itself, because it's a way of like demonstrating and like giving off the signals about who we are as people and kind of what we mean for what people mean for us. It's important that that's done up front. Like, we're not doing it tokenistically once a decision's made. And I think that's part of what some of the frustrations that kind of I've heard from people about local government is, you only speak to us when you've made a decision. So like turning that around to say, actually, our job is to speak to people, care and empathise. And then in our kind of relationships with people, we'll then design our strategies, our policies and the work that we do. So yeah, generous with time, bit of humility, like genuinely caring and empathizing with people, I think is really important for that trust building.
Yeah, I think that's so well put. And I also think not only is it absolutely the right thing to do in order to figure out how to be most helpful and to be able to help later on because you have some trust, but I also think it's important for like the change process, you know, for people who are involved in doing the work to change or improve the service, to be a part of that. So they learn for themselves what's not quite working. Because I think sometimes when people in transformation functions, and I've been guilty of this myself, do a whole bunch of research on a subject and come up with an answer and then try and sell it to a service, it just doesn't work, you know? Whereas if the service is a part of that work, a real partner in the work, then they get to form their own conclusions about what's necessary and probably come up with better answers than the people who are, you know, in the transformation function.
Yeah, so I didn't always think like this, and this is when I got things most wrong, but that change can't be mandated. Like, change it's a movement of people who are inspired and motivated to kind of change themselves first and then look at how they change the broader system. So it is difficult. So not being able to mandate, which means we just don't go and put together some slide decks and a really powerful comms piece and like tell people this is the change you need to make. Like, change will happen over time, incrementally, person by person, through a number of things, right? Through kind of our leaders modeling the change that we expect from our organization. It's about making sure that people who are already working or acting or thinking in a way that represents change are amplified by telling great stories about those great people and the great work they're doing. It's also about making sure that when we do our change work, we are transparent, authentic, and deliberately participative in the work that we do, so that people can see it and feel it and understand it. So that's the thing that we've got to do. We need to make sure that people are kind of motivated through storytelling, but then kind of know the direction they need to go in because they're seeing others do it or involving themselves in it. Yeah. And that way we kind of help to understand our strategies for people who perhaps are struggling to change as quickly as others. I think there's a really kind of fine line between how much of it you mandate and how much of it you create a bit of a social movement within an organization or a system.
Yeah, and I think when people are struggling, it's usually because they stand to lose something, you know, and it's going to be personally uncomfortable for them. And sometimes it's easy to forget about that. We can get, or at least I can get, irritated at that situation. But actually, you know, they're going to be finding it hard for whatever reason, you know, and I probably don't know what that reason is. But a part of it is also, you know, leaning in when you see people struggling with the change or resisting, not just, you know, pushing past them and forcing it through, but actually having drawing on the relationships that you were talking about earlier on. I'm going to actually go and have a conversation with them and figure out what's going on. And maybe there's a really good reason why we're struggling here. But again, that is an investment. That is the work, right?
I know we've got to be generous in those investments as well, because people like people do change. Like, people change at very different speeds and different paces. I think the really important thing is for us to be able to really tell a story about, firstly, why the change is important and what we're replacing that thing that someone was holding on quite dearly to. Yeah. So that, you're right, when people don't like change, it's because like there's just a genuine fear of change sometimes, but that fear comes from people like believing that what will happen will be worse than what currently is happening. So that change of status quo means that situations are worse. Like, involving people and being generous with your time to help them understand that might help change a bit easier. and also like if they're seeing those incremental changes having small incremental benefits to their lives or their work, like if we chunk it up, like people generally can deal with that a lot more than if we were to say there's this massive change coming. Like, see how you can deal with that, guys. Like, I think it's like chunking it up will help us really. People just manage it a lot better, don't they? They can get to grips with it. They can get their heads around it, and it's the most caring way of doing change, right? Just doing it incrementally with people.
Yeah, and the positive side benefit is that we get a little bit of value, and perhaps residents get some benefit from even just that small step forward. And people often like to say that people kind of act themselves into a new way of thinking, right? They do the thing, and they're like, oh, actually, do you know what? This does make sense. This is helpful, without having to force it on them. You started talking earlier on about earlier in your career and having made some mistakes perhaps before working in some of these ways. I wonder if you could talk about some of those. Like, what are some of the, because I got so many projects where I look back and I just think, oh God, with the benefit of hindsight, I would have done that very differently. Can you think of, is there anyone that you can think of? And I wonder what were some of the conditions that maybe weren't in place or things you didn't do that resulted in it going south?
Yeah, so I think when I said like one of the most important things is that relationship building, like where my projects haven't been as successful as I'd like them to be is where I hadn't spent the time building those relationships with the people I needed to at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that was, but also like, I think there was probably a lack of humility on my side as well, like recognizing that because I'd developed something or I'd created something, I'd spent and invested a lot of time in it, like it had to be the right thing. It had to be the thing that worked. So those two things combined, like not really engaging kind of the stakeholders in the right way to say, actually, this thing that we're going to do here might feel a bit different, but I've got you. Like, I'll work with you as much as we can, but actually that your role is to make sure that you're comfortable with it as well. So as soon as things aren't comfortable enough, let's work together to make it feel more comfortable for people. And actually, there's going to be times where like feeling uncomfortable is good. Like you don't have to feel safe the whole way through it. So maybe not spending as much time as I should have done meant that when I came to the kind of ta-da moment and said, actually, this is the thing that we've designed on your behalf, they're like, well, that's so far from kind of what I ever expected. Like, how did you get to this? Like, it didn't sell because I hadn't taken them on the journey and recognized that when we do any kind of generative work, like we're kind of iterating and evolving around the things that we learn. And sometimes the things that we learn go against our original assumptions about what it is that we need to do. So by not taking people on that journey and kind of going in, like maybe not as kind of humble as I could have been around other people's roles, that's when it didn't work, and the work didn't continue after that because people felt done to rather than done with in that moment. Not everyone, but the leaders that needed to make decisions on what we were doing, they were the ones that felt left out.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about you, I think about relationships. Like that for me is one of your strongest qualities. You know, that you really do lean into building relationships with people, and just like the language you just used there. Like, I know this is going to feel uncomfortable, but I got you. Things like that, you never hear that in a professional setting. You know, like often relationships between services are sometimes quite transactional, particularly if you work in a transformation function. You know, oh, the transformation people are going to come and do a project. They're going to give us something. It's not that, is it? It's, you know, it's something that we do together. And in order to be able to get to a place where we can do it together, we need to have relationships. We need to talk in a way that demonstrates to them that we're both people and we're both trying our best. We're not perfect, and probably some things are going to go wrong along the way. And it's like saying it in this kind of language, isn't it? That it's not bullshit language. It's real, honest, human to human communication.
And not just talking, like
doing.
I think doing, but also just playing as well. Like understanding like where as humans, like we can play together is also really important. There's people that like. That come to work who are very different to who they are at home, and that's cool. But at heart, we all kind of want to be considered and felt cared for and involved. And like we have to bring in our kind of authentic selves to work. Like we have to bring in our humor and humility and kindness and playfulness. That all has to come out of work, because if it doesn't, we're not gonna build those relationships. So yeah, I think those things are really important, right? We need to do that. And I think there is something around trying to find like the organizational level that you can have the right conversations about. And I think part of that is around the kind of psychological safety that we need at work as well.
Yeah.
So if we're asking people to be brave, to be curious, and to experiment, like people need to feel safe to do that. And that doesn't mean they need to feel comfortable at any stage. They just need to know that they can be their authentic selves, and they can have challenges. They can kind of rumble on issues together. They can kind of brainstorm and riff on ideas with people without feeling judged. And
Yeah.
I think being authentic is the way that we do that.
Yeah, I think about this so much. There are so many fundamentals that need to be in place for good change work to happen, and nobody talks about this stuff. I mean, there's an emerging conversation around psychological safety, but having real psychological safety in a team, a multidisciplinary team, I'd rather that than a bunch of people that know about agile and service design in depth. Very helpful to have people who are experts in the process, but real trust, real psychological safety, that for me trumps things, you know?
Yeah, and I guess in that, like people who are genuine servant leaders as well.
Yeah.
So people who can put others like needs like above their own. I think that's really important in the work that we do as well. As soon as we get into kind of fighting around our own personal needs, like we probably won't move things forward as how we can.
Yeah. So you just, well, you're in the process of building a team and a function, aren't you? How are you thinking about establishing these kinds of conditions in that team? What's the work to do that?
So I think it's like I think about both the team and the organization, because my team can't function if the conditions in the organization aren't right for them to function themselves. So we've moved within the last 12 months from a very traditional PMO model that we had in Ealing when I moved in, which I think it did some really powerful and positive things for Ealing at a moment in time.
Yeah.
But it's probably not what we completely need at the moment. So
Right.
we've a very ambitious vision as a council, and that means a completely like it needs a really radical way of thinking about what local government is and could be in the future. So we recognised that we needed very different skills, moving away from program and project management, which are definitely still needed.
Yeah.
We moved more into actually we need people who genuinely care and can redesign services around people and what they need with really good alignment to our vision. We also need people who know agile and can actually deliver using kind of agile methodologies. So we've kind of brought in kind of researchers, designers, and delivery managers in the last 12 months. And part of the way that we've done that, or part of our sell to people, was we don't know what this is going to be. We don't know the model that we're delivering yet. We know the principles we want to work to, but we want to get the right people in first, and then with those right people who have got the right values for the organisation. So we are looking for some technical skills, but for us, what we're most looking for is the values that people bring to the work they do, and bringing them together so that we can design kind of our models of change and transformation in Ealing. So we've been very deliberate in making sure that we recruit using a values-based model of recruitment. So
what does that mean?
Well, we're kind of looking for people who are who genuinely care about social issues and being able to deliver social impact. We're looking for people who have got a very experimental mindset, so they don't mind like challenging the status quo and trying new things, learning from those new things, but also are able to bring kindness and humility and generosity to their work so they can engage others in the work they do as well.
Yeah.
We also are looking for people who are inclusive in terms of their mindset and how they make sure inclusivity is every part of the work they do, and people who've got a genuine like energy to deliver.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of like our recruitment. We kind of changed our recruitment to make sure those values came out from it. But we've also started. In our team, we make sure that we've got lots of time for socializing and playing. So we would describe ourselves as uniquely professional, right? So we're genuinely professional at work, but we recognize that kind of laughter and play and fun is part of the work. It's not something different. So we make sure that we build those like qualities within the team, just through the rhythms and the ceremonies that we put into the way that we work. So that's how we've kind of started to build the team, and we're making sure that they are kind of like we're making sure they're supportive of one another. They've got weekly kind of time for their own development, so they're sharing their own knowledge, sharing their own skills, and there's a really nice sense of community across the team at the moment, and people genuinely want to learn and improve and develop together. So that's how we've started to build that team. Organisationally, there's things that we're doing to try and get the right culture in. So again, we're moving to more of a values-based model, the way that we recruit people. We're asking leaders not just to take accountability of their own service, but recognise themselves as a leader that's got accountability for all council services.
Yeah.
So any decisions that are made are based on all residents of the borough and all council services, which I think has helped to foster more collaboration across the organisation, which is great. And we're just moving away from kind of boardroom practices to workshop practices. So our leadership teams, like once a month, wherever they are, they move away from the traditional kind of meeting and get into genuine workshops. Like we've got, I've involved like our chief exec and some of our strategic directors in design sprints where they've been involved in like designing new concepts, but not only that, they've been involved in acting out those new concepts in a live prototype, a working prototype. So there's things we're doing that we're trying to encourage like different practices and different ways of working. The role of our team is that we provide leadership by doing and making sure when we do the work it's visible and transparent, we've got good communications around it, but we also provide a role of coaching. So we try and coach people through the development of communities of practice. We make sure that we've got opportunities for people to check in, ask advice. And the other thing that we do is we make sure that we're always looking across the organisation for those things that are like really good practice, and when we see them, like we tell stories about them,
amplify them.
So we've got a way of doing that, and just in like the last 12 months of us beginning to do this, we're already seeing change in the organisation. I'm seeing not that it's the only way to do it, but I'm seeing lots of post-it notes on walls at the moment which 12 months ago we wouldn't have seen. So it tells me that people they're trying new stuff, right? They're trying to have different conversations and different relationships with their colleagues.
Yeah, I think one really important thing that you're doing is you're building a team. I know you're not looking for people. Don't need to be real specialists to join your team. That values is where it starts, but you are building a team of real experts in the process of some of this stuff. We're trying to get them to a place where they really know how to help people through workshops, or to run a design sprint, or to do user research. And I think that lots of people try and implement an agile way of working or implement human-centered design, and it just doesn't work. So we try and do it massively all at the same time in every part of the organization. There's not enough people to be helpful and help people with the uncertainty that comes with trying out completely different ways of working. Whereas you've got stuff going across the organization, but you're introducing it and helping people through that process, right? And I think that's really, really important. And creating spaces where people can come and say, I don't know, like communities practice, I'm not 100% sure on this. Like, where can I get some help? Or have we got some good examples of where this has worked elsewhere? And there's no one right answer, is there, to like introducing this stuff well. It takes lots of different things across the organization to build a bit of a groundswell, doesn't it?
It does, and I don't feel like we've necessarily had to introduce it across the whole organisation, because if I look across Ealing and I look across any of like the public organisations I know, I think a lot of this happens anyway. It's just not named.
Yeah.
So when you look at the role of a children's social worker, I said earlier, like they generally empathise and care, like for the families they're working with. They try and understand the causal points of problems, and once they've got those, they work with the families to create new paradigms within people's lives. They try and create new ways of people kind of living and getting by. So, and if things don't go right, they try again, right? They don't just stop. They try something different.
You can't just leave it.
They go again, right? They keep going, and like things come in and out of the system all the time, and they're constantly iterating and experimenting. So it isn't a difficult sell if you recognise where it is already happening.
Yeah.
So I don't think I wouldn't like to say I've introduced it, but what I have done is kind of try and like translate what we're trying to do to the fact that we're already doing it in different spaces.
Yeah, I mean, we've done loads of agile training with frontline children's services folks, and strip away all the language about ceremonies and roles and stuff, and it just makes intuitive sense. You know, like this is the only way of making progress, really, with a family that has hard problems to deal with. So I like that you've sort of landed on that too. It gives me some confidence that we're thinking in the right way as well.
I've spoken briefly about like communities of practice and people having opportunities to train together within their team, but it's also really important that we're constantly looking externally. Like we're conscious that both the sector changes, but also kind of just industry in itself changes, and we need as a local government, we need to be able to learn from other pioneers, right? So where can we go to be inspired by? And some of those places kind of already exist in the public sector, but may not be seen as a public sector organisation. So BASIS, for example, are a company that I've worked with like a couple of times in my career, and have found them to be like excellent practitioners, both in agile and service design, but also are the kind of people that I want to work with. They're kind of grounded in a social purpose. They are experts in the way that they coach and advise and work alongside people. I've never experienced them like doing two like you do with some consultancies, and actually they are kind of very generous with the way that they build relationships in local government, not just individually, but the way they connect people together. So having been on some agile training with BASIS, I've been putting my staff through kind of the agile training, and we've also done some work with BASIS and our leadership group to make sure that people aren't just hearing from me all the time, right? If they hear kind of a voice of one person in the organisation, it might have some impact. If you amplify that voice with kind of external partners and people who've got knowledge across the broader sector, it plays a real role in making sure that the way that we develop not just individuals in the organisation, but the culture and the disciplines that exist within the organisation kind of happen really well. So yeah, so BASIS have been great in doing that.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you being so kind. Cheers for sharing.
You're very welcome. It's been very helpful.
Oh, thanks, man. Look, I've already kept you for a whole bunch of time, and I feel like we could keep this conversation going for a long time. But I think lots of people watching this will be after some people will be after some inspiration. Some people will be looking for perhaps even role models of people in similar jobs to them who are doing the kinds of things they aspire to do. But some people will be after some advice. So what advice would you give? If you could give one piece of advice to somebody that's working in the same space that we're in now, I'm happy for you to choose somebody who's earlier in their career or somebody who's later in their career, whatever most speaks to you. What would that advice be?
So there's probably a few bits. Like for me, the first one is like lean into being brave, like because it is like to try something new in a sector that is built historically on things that keep people safe, whether that is council budgets or whether it is child protection services, whatever it is. Like the things that are there are designed for people to feel safe and in control of what's happening. Like sometimes those things still aren't working even though people feel safe, so you have to be quite brave to take a risk and try something different. I think that for me, like do it, be brave. Like nothing bad's going to happen as a result, but be brave about it. I also, just the point I made earlier, like genuinely find time to build relationships with the people that you need to build relationships with. If you're trying to implement something new, it's never going to happen if you haven't got someone by your side co-signing. So I think it's helpful to helpful for someone to do that.
Nice. I think that's a really nice place to end it. Thanks so much for coming and spending the afternoon with me. This was mega helpful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So as you can see, these conversations are quite a selfish endeavor on my part because I just get to learn a whole bunch from them. And I'm certain that people watching these interviews will have their own questions, or perhaps maybe even people that they would like me to speak to. If you've got any suggestions about either questions or folks that you'd like me to interview, then I am very, very up for hearing about it, and I'll try and make that happen. So drop them in the comments on this post, or maybe contact us on social media, and we'll see what we can do. See you soon.